Hi everyone, this is Scott. For maps, references, and images for each episode, as well as links to all my social media, please go to ancientworldpodcast.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/theancientworld. Thanks again for listening. For someone who hated the city of Lagash, Ur-Namma pulled a lot from Gudea's playbook. Both men emphasized their role as builders of city walls, temples, and canals. In contrast to the Akkadians, and similar to the nomarchs of contemporary Egypt, both cast themselves as protectors and good shepherds, who kept their people safe and prosperous and promoted harmony and justice. And while both men boasted of their strength, neither chose to highlight their military exploits. And here's where the two may have differed. While Gudea likely fought a single campaign against Elamite Anshan, Ur-Namma's path to Sumerian conquest was likely a bit more bloody. If you remember, the Sumerian norm before the Akkadians was independent city-states that occasionally formed alliances, much like classical Greece. Lugal-Zaggisi had tried to unify the Sumerians through conquest, which had just paved the way for King Sargon, whom you're welcome to think of as Philip II. After centuries of domination by Akkad and the Guti, it seems unlikely that major cities would just surrender their independence, even to a fellow Sumerian. King of Kish, hegemon, first among equals, sure, but not complete and total subordination. Ur-Namma started with a few legs up. He'd been the right-hand man of the legendary freedom fighter Utu-Hagal, and his rapid seizure of Uruk and Lagash showed strength and possibly divine favor. He'd built on this by getting himself crowned in the religious capital of Nippur. And he may have argued, with some justification, that unity was needed for the next big push, reclaiming central Mesopotamian lands from the Elamite Empire of Kutik-in-Shushinak. It's also true that, at this point, there were few southern cities with the strength to openly oppose him. So things likely went down one of two ways. Either, as Utu-Hagal might put it, Sumer chose to, as one man, follow behind Ur-Namma, or maybe more likely, Ur-Namma was forced to fight for his crown, city by city, region by region, until the last Sumerian resistance finally crumbled. If this is how things actually transpired, you'd be hard-pressed to find any records. Per Peter Espach, neither the inscriptions of Ur-Namma nor his year names devote attention to battles in Sumer. It's pretty likely that after taking power, Ur-Namma tossed any period of conflict right down the memory hole, if only by choosing not to record it. Per the Sumerian king list, kingship was simply carried off to Ur, more specifically to its third royal dynasty. Ur-Namma marked his new preeminence by commissioning a major project, the rebuilding of the temple of the moon god Nana at Ur. The temple was known as the A10 Niguru, or the house whose foundation creates terror, which I must admit is a pretty cool name. Sumerian temples were always stepped structures, built on elevated platforms, and with each new iteration built atop the remains of the previous version. The White Temple of Uruk, dedicated to the sky god An, is a famous early example. With his reconstruction of the moon god's temple, Ur-Namma tried something new. It was purposely designed as a multi-level structure, with each level smaller than the one below, creating a stepped appearance. A series of stairways climbed to the top, and it's in this area, only accessible by priests, that the shrine of the moon god resided. Per Amanda H. Podani, the result was a truly massive monument, composed of approximately 2 million baked bricks, plus another 5 million sun-dried bricks, likely engaging 1,000 workers for nearly half a year. As best we can tell, its original dimensions were 64 meters long, 45 meters wide, and over 30 meters high. So much smaller than the Giza pyramids, but around the same size as the pyramids of the 5th dynasty Egyptian sun kings. Per Samuel Noah Kramer, the temple was only the dominant structure in a massive temple enclosure, some 400 by 200 meters in size, which also held shrines, storehouses, courtyards, and the dwellings of temple personnel. Ur-Namma commissioned similar monuments in other Sumerian cities, including Eridu, one of his earliest holdings, Uruk, where he'd succeeded Utu-Hagal, and Nippur, where he'd been crowned king of Sumer and Akkad. Over time, these temples were described using an Akkadian term meaning to be high up, Zikuratu, or Ziggurat. One of Ur-Namma's contemporary year names marks the restart of trade with Magan, modern Oman, likely exchanging wool and textiles for copper and darkstone diorite. Per another year name, Ur-Namma the king put the roads in order from below to above. A related inscription unpacks this a bit, detailing that I regulated the riverboat traffic on the banks of the Tigris, the Euphrates, and on the banks of all rivers. I secured safe roads for the couriers. I established road stations, planted orchards beside them, and placed gardeners in charge of them. This was basically a system of Sumerian rest stops, staffed by the state, with fruit trees for food, and so that, as a later king framed it, travelers might refresh themselves in their cool shade. I mentioned earlier that one thing Ur-Namma cribbed from Lagash was a focus on social justice. The general thrust goes all the way back to the OG lawgiver Uruk-Agena of Lagash, and Gudea done his part to keep the ball rolling. Ur-Namma asserts that under his reign, the orphan was not handed over to the rich man. The widow was not handed over to the mighty man. The man of 1 shekel was not handed over to the man of 1 mina. I banished evil, violence, and cause for complaint. I established justice in the land. All good sentiments, even if cribbed, but Ur-Namma's most significant contribution was compiling a list of if-then statements recording the penalties for various crimes. The result, conventionally known as the Code of Ur-Namma, is the oldest surviving legal code in human history, since we only know of Uruk-Agena's code from later fragmentary reference. Of the 57 laws Ur-Namma inscribed, around 30 are still preserved. Capital crimes include murder, robbery, sorcery, and deflowering the virgin wife of a young man, or as I call it, Gilgameshing, all of which merited death. Most laws pertain to marriage, slavery, and physical altercations, with the offending party usually paying a fine. To sum up, in the years after being crowned in Nippur, Ur-Namma unified Sumer, facilitated travel and trade, refurbished the city's main temple, and established a new legal code. And with his rule established, he decided to embark on some seriously unfinished business. Ur-Namma may have been king of Sumer and Akkad, but at the moment he only controlled Sumer, while Akkad was still held by Kutik in Shushinak. It's possible the moment of conflict was forced. Records show that the Elamite Empire now held the city of Umma. That's deep southern Sumer, but in striking distance of both Elamite Akkad and Elamite Susa. so it could have been taken from either direction, or both. It may have been in response to this seizure that, ready or not, Ur-Namma decided to act. In an inscription, the king records launching a campaign against Umma, Murad, Girkal, Kazalu, and Usarum, those cities which had been subjugated by Anshan. By the might of the god Nana, my lord, I established their freedom. Which is a good time to remind you that I have some very spiffy new maps posted to help you keep everything straight. With Ur-Namma's capture, or liberation, of these cities, Elamite forces were pushed back north to the former capital of Akkad. Kutik and Shushinak retained control of the Diyala Valley and parts of the northern Tigris. And, a huge chunk of the Zagros Mountains and all of Elam. Well, maybe not quite all. A recent study of inscribed vessels suggests that Ur-Namma may have also conquered lowland Susa at around this same time. There things sat for a few more years, while King Ur-Namma busied himself with a slew of domestic priorities. There was the incorporation of captured territories into his kingdom, installation of a second daughter as High Priestess of Inanna at Uruk, building a new city wall at Ur, digging several major canals, and building new temples at Ur and Nippur, including a brand new iteration of the Temple of Enlil. So, sorry Naram-Sin and Shar-Kali-Shari, you really shouldn't have bothered. All of which brings us to 2094 BC. Over a century into the Aridification event, 24 years into Ur-Namma's kingship, and 18 years since the death of Utu-Hagal. This was the year that Ur-Namma launched a major campaign to retake Akkad from the Elamites. Per Douglas R. Frayne, 2 inscriptions describe wars the king waged in regions northeast of Sumer. In the first text, the king's antagonist is explicitly identified as Kutik and Shushinak. This conflict was fought in the Elamite highlands, and Ur-Namma emerged victorious. As a consequence, he was able to capture all former Akkadian territories along the Tigris and Diyala, including Awal, Eshnuna, and, most symbolically, the former imperial capital of Akkad. In a subsequent battle, likely the same year, Ur-Namma faced off against the Elamites and Guti, possibly somewhere along the Diyala. And it's likely that sometime during this battle, Ur-Namma was killed by the Guti. A later composition, The Death of Ur-Namma, relates how the trustworthy shepherd, king, the sword of Sumer, Ur-Namma, the king of the land, he who was beloved by the troops, could not raise his neck any more. The wise one lay down. Silence descended. As he who was the vigor of the land had fallen, the land became demolished like a mountain. He passed away in his prime, abandoned like a broken jar. It's a testament to the groundwork he laid that Ur-Namma's death saw 0 revolts, just the peaceful transfer of power to his son, the Crown Prince Shulgi. And you might want to get real comfortable with Shulgi, because he's going to remain in power for the next 48 years. We also have year names for all of his years, making him one of the best documented rulers in all of Mesopotamian history. Shulgi's long reign suggests he was young, likely in his teens, when he first assumed the kingship. A few years earlier, he'd been wed to a Mariot princess named Taram-Uram. Her father, Apilkin the Great, was the current king of Mari, a member of the Shakanaku dynasty installed by Akkad, and, fun fact, one of Naram-Sin's direct descendants. Which meant that on Shulgi's elevation, Naram-Sin's great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter became queen of Sumer and Akkad. Shulgi apparently started his reign by seeking revenge on the Guti. Per Frayne, a passage from a later hymn records the new king being crowned in Nippur on his return from a Guti battlefield. A second coronation, held at Ur, bestowed him with royal regalia, including a pure crown, a scepter of long days, a throne with a secure foundation, and the nose rope of the people. Which, okay, that's a little too graphic. The dynasty he ruled, the Third Dynasty of Ur, is sometimes abbreviated as Ur-3, which you'll hear me use sometimes. It's also called the Neo-Sumerian Empire. And while some aspects of its shape and structure may have been planned by its founder, Ur-Namma, its nature likely owes much, much more to the reign of his son, King Shulgi. The empire proper was composed of Sumer and Akkad, the lands of southern and central Mesopotamia, along with neighboring Susiana. And that was basically it. Compared to the sprawling conquests of Akkad, Ur-3 was much more compact, homogeneous, and amenable to centralized control. Or at least, that was the idea. Per Daniel Patterson, the empire was divided into 19 provinces, 9 in Sumer and 10 in Akkad. The Sumerian provinces were Ur, Uruk, Girsu, Umma, Shurupak, Adab, Isin, Zagros, and Nippur, while the Akkadian provinces were Murad, Apiak, Kazalu, Kish, Babylon, Kutha, Push, Urum, Tiwe, and Sippar. You may have noticed that Akkad itself is absent from the list, replaced by nearby Kish. Each province was basically a traditional city-state, including its previous hinterland, and was governed by a local ensi, which resumed its Akkadian meaning of provincial governor. Each province was also assigned a general who answered directly to the king. Per Patterson, Shulgi also created a vast new network of royal settlements scattered throughout the empire, subject to the authority of generals and captains and administered by mayors and city elders. The settlements held estates for the royal family, along with substantial military garrisons, in one known case of 1,000 men. They were sometimes sited near existing settlements, but allocated much more land, which smacks a bit of good old-fashioned Akkadian-style military domination. To maintain a steady stream of revenue, Shulgi established the Bala, or rotation system, where each month a different province was responsible for paying its taxes. Even if not as harsh as Akkad, the burden was pretty substantial, with a significant portion of provincial revenues, 48% of barley in one example, diverted to the central government. Per Aaron A. Burke, family-based merchant guilds were likely engaged to do the actual tax farming. Productivity was factored in, and provinces allowed to pay in kind according to available resources, such as grain, silver, timber, cattle, or manufactured goods, which the king could then redeploy across the empire as needed. Proceeds were gathered at the major collection point of Puzrish Dagon near Nippur, with some proceeds going from there to Nippur and the rest to the capital of Ur. Just to the east of his empire proper, Shulgi established military control over a frontier zone running from Ur-3-controlled Susa up to the northern territory of Subartu between the Tigris River and the Zagros Mountains. This trans-Tigridian corridor was dotted with numerous minor kingdoms, city-states, peoples, and tribes, whom Shulgi chose to address in a variety of manners. His will was enforced via local military garrisons, eventually numbering over 100, who controlled all movement and communication while maximizing resource extraction. Per Patterson, like in the later Roman Empire, garrisons may have housed Sumerian troops along with local auxiliaries. And spoiler alert, a lot of the energy of Ur-3 kings, including Shulgi, will be spent trying to expand or trying to defend this volatile eastern strip. Like his father, Shulgi maintained relations with Dilmun, Magan, and the lands beyond, along with northern Mesopotamia and Syria, including Byblos, Yamkad, and especially his wife's family in Mari. In fact, her brothers, Idi Elum, Ili Ishar, and Tura Dagon would rule over Mari for the majority of Shulgi's reign. Mari'd had considerable growth since the onset of the aridification event, likely due to a major influx of Amorite refugees. Per Burke, it's noteworthy that a number of major construction projects, including the restoration of Mari's temples and the building of its massive fortifications, took place during this same period. Per Patterson, international relations were mainly delegated to a figure called the Suk-ul-Ma, translated as Great Secretary or Secretary of State. The Suk-ul-Ma was the highest-ranking Ur-3 figure apart from the king. In addition to being governors or generals, they often served as Ur-3 emissaries to the courts of foreign rulers. As I mentioned, we're fortunate to have all 48 of Shulgi's year names. But per Patterson, using year names to reconstruct a detailed chronology presents some inherent challenges. First, it's unclear whether years were named after events that took place earlier the same year or those that took place during the previous year. Evidence exists for both cases. Second, different Ur-3 provinces sometimes adopted different and/or multiple year names, highlighting different accomplishments. Third, military campaigns, even if significant, didn't always make the cut. This is most clearly demonstrated on occasions when a territory is first mentioned as being ruined for the second time, or when documents record plunder from a campaign not highlighted in the associated year name. As a final challenge, year names marking a territory's ruination may refer to victories won at the end of campaigns launched a year or more earlier. Unfortunately, while they might shed more light, the royal archives of Ur have never been found, and the details of specific military campaigns were likely kept in the so far unexcavated homes of senior generals. Despite these caveats, the major events of Shulgi's reign can be relayed with reasonable confidence. The year names of his first 2 decades give pride of place to his building projects, including a brand new palace called the Mountain House and literally dozens of temples. In Susa, an inscription on a foundation nail records that Shulgi, mighty man, king of Ur, king of the lands of Sumer and Akkad, built for the god Inshushinak his temple. He restored it for him. Statuettes, recovered from temple foundation deposits, show Shulgi symbolically pitching in by carrying a basket of earth on his head. One thing Shulgi had to nuance was his dynasty's take on the extremely memorable and relatively recent Akkadian Empire. Per Benjamin J. Foster, on the one hand, the popular view of Akkadian rule was on full display on their vandalized statues, with names and inscriptions erased, eyes gouged out, ears, noses, and lips cut off, and not infrequent beheadings. Conversely, certain aspects of that era, the power, the scope, the unified control, were an ongoing inspiration for Ur-3 kings. As a result, along with shrines to their own dead kings, the dynasty maintained shrines to Sargon, Manishtushu, and Naram-Sin, where regular offerings were made. In fact, a statue of Sargon at the temple of Shamash at Sippar was still receiving offerings in the reign of the Persian king Cambyses. Year 7 of Shulgi's reign was the year the king made a round trip between Ur and Nippur. supposedly by foot and sprinting both ways. And he was not at all shy about blowing his own horn. That praise of me break out in foreign lands, I, the speedy one, summon my strength to test my running. From Nippur to the brickwork of Ur, my heart prompted me to make a round trip as if it were only a mile. Per Frayne, Shulgi may have marked the occasion by dedicating a statue in Nippur showing the king as a racer, so giving me serious Hebsed vibes. In a related inscription, the king compares himself to a horse of the highway that swishes his tail, which tells us that by the mid-21st century BC, horses were familiar enough in Mesopotamia for a king to use one in a favorable comparison. The vast majority of horses on Earth still lived in the Eurasian steppe, but a minor trickle had recently arrived via traders in the Caucasus and Anatolian highlands, which is how horses got their Sumerian nickname, Ass of the Mountains. Shulgi also put roads in order and expanded the system of way stations with gardens built by his father Ur-Namma. He also continued his father's efforts to standardize weights and measures. His reform of the scribal education program included promoting a brand new form of Sumerian literature, the praise poem. Whether drafted by students or, at least as often, by Shulgi himself, the poems lauded the king's astounding abilities, including his strength and martial prowess, along with his unmatched piety. Like the Akkadians and Ur-Namma, Shulgi relied on royal marriages to buttress regional diplomacy. Along with his Mariote queen, Taram-Uram, Shulgi'd eventually take 8 more wives, some from the major Sumerian cities and others from neighboring kingdoms. One of the most important was Shulgi Simti, mother of the crown prince Amar-Sin, who hailed from the Diyala region and may have been ethnically Akkadian. Shulgi's male heirs, known as Dumu-Lugal, or son of the king, numbered more than 20. A few were recorded as serving as generals, including Etel-Pu-Dagan and the aforementioned Amar-Sin, who served in both the city of Dare and the fortress of Anu in Uruk. Shulgi also arranged royal marriages for several of his daughters. One was wed to the king of the minor, though presumably important, Trans-Tigridian territory of Pashime. And year 18 of Shulgi's reign was named the year Liwir-Metashu, daughter of the king, was elevated to the queenship of Marhashi. As discussed previously, Marhashi, or the Jiroft culture, was centered on the Halil River Valley southeast of Anshan. The last we really heard from them was when Shar-Kali-Shari married a Marhashi princess, who became the Akkadian queen. Then, shortly after, when Marhashi'd helped to liberate Elamite territories, then launched an attack on Akkad. After vanishing from texts for over a century, Marhashi re-engaged pretty hard and fast with the Neo-Sumerian Empire. Per D.T. Potts, records show that Marhashi and Ur-III exchanged goods, wealth, property, and items of economic value, as well as diplomacy, entertainments, rituals, military support, dances, and feasts. The apex of this re-engagement was the marriage of Shulgi's daughter to the current Marhashi king.
Experience a membership that backs what you're building with American Express Business Platinum. Get 2 times membership rewards points per dollar on eligible purchases in key business categories, as well as on each eligible purchase of $5,000 or more, on up to $2 million in eligible purchases per calendar year. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kan du norsk?
If you used Babbel, you would. Babbel's conversation-based techniques teaches you useful words and phrases to get you speaking quickly about the things you actually talk about in the real world, with lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts and voiced by real native speakers. Babbel is like having a private tutor in your pocket. Start speaking with Babbel today. Get up to 55% off your Babbel subscription right now at babbel.com/Spotify, spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify. Rules and restrictions may apply.
As you may have noticed, the year names for Shulgi's first 2 decades are entirely devoid of conflict. The dominant theme is building and furnishing temples, crafting cult objects, installing statues, and selecting new high priests. Throw in a body of flattering praise poems and the possible composition and promulgation of an early Sumerian king list, and you get a picture of a king legitimizing his rule and the rule of the Ur-3 dynasty. At the same time, peaceful year names distance the regime from the age of the hated Akkadians, as well as from any violence employed by Ur-Namma in forging the Ur-3 empire. Until ... dramatic pause. Beginning in Shulgi's year 21, the year names drastically changed. From building temples and putting roads in order to the sudden violent destruction of neighboring territories. The year Dare was ruined. The year Karahar was ruined. The year Samurim was ruined. The year Harshi was ruined. Such conflicts remained the dominant theme for most of the next 3 decades, with some sites suffering multiple ruinations. While the violence clearly evoked the Akkadians, there were some critical distinctions. None of the conflicts were internal revolts in Sumer, Akkad, or Susiana, and none involved the cities of Syria or the lands of the Persian Gulf. Instead, most of Shulgi's campaigns seemed targeted toward a very specific goal: reinforcing Ur-3 domination of the Trans-Tigridian corridor and pushing further eastward into the Zagros Mountains. The ground for conflict was likely laid in Shulgi's year 20, named the year the men of Ur were conscripted as lancers. Per Patterson, this likely referred to the standard Sumerian Aaron, or conscript soldier, outfitted with a sukur or spear, a heavy leather or woolen cloak, and a shield of reed or leather with metal fittings. These troops, who made up the bulk of Ur-3 forces, were overseen by regular soldiers, Aga-Us or crown followers, who may have specialized as archers. Among the standard military ranks were Ugala or sergeants, Nubanda or captains, and the Shakan or Shagina, generals. There were also elite soldiers called Gardu or champions, possibly royal bodyguards. In addition to the spear and bow, those above the lower ranks were also often armed with daggers or axes. Per Patterson, an interesting feature of the Ur-3 military is that its uppermost ranks weren't reserved for the royal family, or even for ethnic Sumerians. Many senior officers had foreign backgrounds, from Marhashi, Elamite, Hurrian, Amorite, and various Trans-Tigridian and Zagros territories. The common requirement appears to have been an ability to bring along a large body of troops to serve the king. Per the author, while the Ur-3 military undoubtedly drew from, or was patterned after, the Akkadian army, its organizational structure, garrison system, and use of auxiliaries are strikingly similar to much later Neo-Assyria. From the start of this new, more militant era, one site that played a prominent role was the Royal Administrative Center of Puzrish Dagan. As I mentioned, this was where the monthly Bala taxes were collected. And as it turns out, it also made a convenient spot for mustering the Ur-3 army. Per Patterson, its proximity to Nippur, home to a major temple of the Sumerian war god Ninurta, may have enabled ritual oath-taking by foreign mercenary troops. The increased importance of Puzrish Dagon can be seen in the voluminous records of military supplies, including feasts for returning soldiers, together with campaign spoils, typically livestock, slaves, and precious metals. The site was also suitably close to Shulgi's first set of targets. In the wake of the Akkadian collapse, a number of minor kingdoms had established or re-established themselves along the Zagros foothills. The southernmost city-state, around 60 miles west of Susa, was called Pashime, into whose ruling family Shulgi recently wed one of his daughters. It's with the next major city-state moving northwest that Shulgi started his campaigns. Dare was the largest city in the Zagros foothills between Susiana and the Diyala region, and though independent, had strong Sumerian ties. Shulgi named his year 11 the year the god Ishtaran of Dare was brought into his temple. And Shulgi's son, the crown prince Amar Sin, had served as the city's general. But per Patterson, at some point Dare had either rebelled or been seized by an outside enemy. The city sat at the head of a pass leading up into the Zagros, one that joined another branch along the Diyala already under Shulgi's control. His ruination of Dare in year 21 was followed by constructing a pair of forts, Ishim Shulgi and Shulgi Nana, to reinforce his conquest. His next three targets, Harshi, Karahar, and Simuram, lay farther northwest, the latter two in the Diyala region. As Patterson notes, the king of Simuram, Tabandara, proved quite the resilient opponent. The fact that each city required multiple ruinations suggests fierce resistance from local tribes, particularly our old friends, the Lalubi. Victories were measured in raids and plunder rather than establishing control, which is unsurprising since it's the same region Naram Sin tried and failed to fully dominate across many years of campaigns. Shulgi launched attacks on 6 occasions between his years 24 and 32. Like Naram Sin, his goal was likely forcing a path through the Zagros Mountains to the lands of the Persian Plateau. Year 30 sounded a brighter note, the year the daughter of the king was married to the governor of Anshan. And now that Elam's re-entered the picture, we need to circle back to Kutik and Shushinak. The last inscription mentioning his name was from over 30 years earlier, when he'd battled Ur-Namma in the Zagros highlands. But in order to explain how his empire fell, we need to go back a bit further. On a life-size statue made during his reign, Kutik and Shushinak carved an inscription recording his numerous conquests. Prominent space was also devoted to another important event, a visit to his court by a powerful ruler from the nearby kingdom of Shamashki. Though its exact location is still debated, Shamashki lay somewhere north of Elamite Anshan. As to the kingdom's origins, well, we'll get more into that next episode. It's possible that Ur-Namma had enlisted the help of a Shamashki king named Kir-Name in his war against Kutik and Shushinak. It's more likely that Ur-Namma's victories in Mesopotamia and Susiana put Kutik and Shushinak on the ropes, and Kir-Name swept in later to finish him off. With the final defeat of the Elamite king, Shamashki gained control of the highland territories around Anshan, along with recent Elamite conquests along the Zagros. Fast forward to where we left things off. The current Shamashki king, Eparti, ruled Anshan through an Elamite vassal named Libum, who, in Shulgi's year 30, was wed to one of his daughters. It's unclear why Aparti let this happen. The absence of records leave it a mystery, but Shulgi was clearly angling to extend his influence. And when Plan A failed to secure his goal, he quickly switched to Plan B. Shulgi's year 34 was called the year Anshan was ruined. Launching a full-scale attack on Anshan was a pretty provocative move, one that easily could have drawn in neighboring Shamashki. To increase his prospects for military success, Shulgi may have coordinated his assault with the nearby kingdom of Marhashi, whose ruler, as noted in year 18, was Shulgi's son-in-law. Though Shulgi claims a ruination, Anshan was likely captured and held. Control of the city conferred major advantages, including access to highland resources and control of overland trade. In fact, once he'd subjugated Anshan, Shulgi halted his Zagros campaigns for the better part of a decade. As for Shamashki, well, they apparently decided to bide their time, at least for the next few decades. To get a better feel for regional developments, we're going to spend the whole next episode behind the Zagros Mountains. Along with Shamashki and Marhashi, we'll also catch up with the Indus Valley civilization and cover the brief and brilliant fluorescence of the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex, much better known as the Oxus civilization. Would you like to listen to ad-free episodes of The Ancient World and a bunch of other great history podcasts? Then go to The Ancient World Podcast on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Airwave History Plus. You'll get a free 7-day trial to listen to ad-free episodes, bonus content, and more from the largest collection of history podcasts anywhere. So subscribe to Airwave History Plus on Apple Podcasts today.